Hi, welcome to another tutorial. I hope you're all well and happy despite the awful things that are going on in the world at the moment. But less of that, let's paint. Today we're going to paint a seascape, so I have wet the paper all over down to the horizon line, which is about 2/3 of the paper, and now I'm just putting in a bit of diluted raw sienna. Here we're going to put in quite strong and dark. It's a mixture of Payne's grey and Prussian blue. Mix the Prussian blue well on the palette, otherwise you can end up having splodges of raw paint which stain. So make sure it's mixed up well, then spread it across the top quite thickly. Make up lots of paint because you'll need quite a lot of it. Don't worry if it streams down like this, because we're going to do our usual tilting trick. I'm just working to try and get enough texture and direction in the wash. Now I'm just going in across the top and here and there with some Payne's grey, fairly thick paint, so that it stays there and doesn't run too much. I'm now going to turn it round, and that will make the paint run horizontally rather than vertically, which should stabilise it. Now load up your hake brush with some really strong paint, Payne's grey and Prussian blue, and sweep it boldly horizontally across the page. See if you can get this sort of dry brush effect. If you can't, don't worry about it. It does need some practice, but you can work with whatever textures you get, because a sea doesn't have to look like that. It can be anything. I will tag the dry brush tips and techniques video for you though, so that you can have a look at that if you need to refresh yourselves and your memories. But once you practice the technique, it's quite easy to do the dry brush stroke. Now we're going to, with a clean damp brush, straighten up the horizon line a little bit. And then we're going to, with some raw sienna, just add a little bit of colour to the sea. Just a little bit to the right in the foreground water, and we'll try and get some. We have to just use a clean damp brush just to spread it over a little bit more evenly across just under the horizon line. Now, still with the clean damp brush, I'm going to gently sweep it across. It must be damp, not wet, just across the foreground sea to give a bit of direction to the waves. And clean the brush again, squeeze out all the water, and then just make sure that your horizon line is really straight, because we don't want water going uphill or downhill. Right, do the same again. Clean out the hake brush and really squeeze all the water out, and shape the end into a chisel edge like this, because what I'm going to do is use it as a thirsty brush just to lift out some of the damp paint in the foreground, in the darkest parts of the water, just in little hit and miss spots and little lines, just to get the suggestion of waves and water spray. You can use a tissue, a little scrunched up piece of tissue or something for this as well as this, or instead, it's up to you, just to dab out just a few more little tiny bits of sea spray. Now I'm going to get the rigger brush, and with a little bit of Payne's grey, not too wet, not too dry, I'm just going to put in a few hints of shadow and darkness underneath some of those areas of the wave. Right, I've completely dried it off now, and let's look at this headland. You can see that it looks like there's a faint headland on the left side, so I think here on the right is where I'm just going to paint in onto the dry painting a very faint headland. I'm going to use a number 6 round and very pale, fairly pale grey paint, and just carefully paint in a distant cliff or headland. And then clean the brush, make sure it's just damp, and run it across the bottom underneath the paint where you've painted the headland, so that you end up softening it down to nothing. And that's that for the headland. Now if you get to this point, you can pause it and you can copy my birds. I've penciled them in, or you can obviously draw in your own, but if you'd like to copy them, then just pause it at that point. Now I'm using my, I think it's a number 1 rigger, and I'm just using a mixture of Payne's grey and Prussian blue, quite pale because I don't want them to stand out too much, just to carefully paint them in over the pencil lines. When I get to the wings, I try to flick the brush off a little tiny bit so that the stroke tapers. These birds closer to the sea are a bit larger, so I'm going to put a little bit more detail in them, and the birds towards the top get much smaller because they are in the distance. Keep them quite small and faint at the back. And now I'm just adding a little bit more body to the bottom few gulls, just thickening up the wings a tiny bit and just putting in the suggestion of bodies and legs and heads, nothing definite. And finally, with a little bit of white gouache on a small brush, any small brush will do, I'm just going to dot around and put in some splashes of water, just make it look a little bit brighter across the front and the crest of the waves. You don't have to, and I wouldn't normally, but it's fun to do, and if you don't quite manage to get the waves looking right, then you can use the white gouache to create that lovely sea spray look. A tiny bit of white paint on the backs of the gulls, just to look like the sky's reflecting on their wings as they fly, and that's it. We've got a rather nice seascape, and remember, it doesn't have to be exactly like this when you do yours. Just try and look for the opportunities and look for the shapes, especially in the sea area. As long as you keep your lines and brush strokes running horizontally from side to side, you should end up with something that looks like waves and sea. And I will link in the tags to the dry brush video, just in case you need to look back at that again. Anyway, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye for now.